And the bopping begins shortly. Hello and welcome to the HR Data Labs Brown Bag Lunch. I am your host, David Turetsky, and we are sponsored by Salary.com. And today we have with us our friend, Mike Curran, who had been here, I guess a few weeks ago, and we just didn't finish. We had to keep going because there was so much to discuss. So, Mike, welcome back.
Thanks, David. I'm glad to be back.
So, Mike, I'm not going to make you go through everything that we talked about last time. In fact, if anybody wants to know about how accomplished and how brilliant Mike is, go listen to the last one because it was a lot of fun. But I will say, I went to Amazon and I have your book in my shopping cart. I don't remember whether it was the first book or the second book, but I think it was the one you talked about where you use the narrative of being in the person's life.
Right. Yeah. It's a novel.
I need to read that one.
Yeah, I'm going to write a book about you and Data Labs. It's going to be a rip roaring page turner.
I'm sure it's going to be a page turner. And you know it's going to be a page turner when someone falls asleep and it's turning their stomach and it's also on their chest as they fall asleep. Yeah. That's what it'll be.
Yeah, given the intro so far, I think people are shutting off right now. So,
no, I doubt it. Because today we're going to keep going on talking about effective uses of market data. And if they had listened or watched the last podcast, we had started talking about the evolution of market pricing and use of market data from its infancy. And I think we got beyond the Pleistocene era. Right. And we had started talking about its adolescent stage.
Yeah.
And if I can remind you, we were talking about its beginnings and where it started with. I think it was you had mentioned it started with Ford.
Yes. Industrial engineering.
And industrial engineering,
and
right?
Motion studies.
Yeah.
They wrote the first job descriptions, in a formalized way.
And everyone hates them now for that.
Sure. Well,
I haven't met clients who actually love the job description process. And yes, it's part of work, and it's part of it's a part of a regulation. You have to have them. But I guess the question is, we know that job descriptions aren't kept up to date, but they're also the basis for doing these types of analyses, right?
Sure.
The Use Case Podcast is where technology vendors get to talk about themselves. And it's a wonderful place for vendors, investors, and practitioners to listen to the story of the solution, the features, the benefits, the attributes, etc. And we get to know the CEO or founder during the call, and we also get to know the tech. So subscribe to the Use Case Podcast.
So we can't really get beyond them.
Well, I think we did talk about this a little bit in terms of the quality of surveys and what are some of the things that impact the quality of any kind of market data you're looking at. And if it's market, and then I thought, we really were probably a little too narrow in that conversation in the sense that we're talking about actual pay surveys, whether it was, in the old days, salary only or salary and bonus, or then you add in equity awards and you can add in private equity carry and all sorts of different things. And you get into option valuations, et cetera. But there's a lot of market data that is not necessarily on pay levels. It could be on pay practices. It could be on structures. It could be on a variety of topics.
Yeah.
And in some respects, those, particularly when you get to the board level, are considered more important. So if you're looking at executive benchmarking, so what did that person get paid? Well, the answer is they got paid most of their money in non-cash instruments. And what do they look like? So if you take plans that are designed off of regular stock, like a restricted stock plan or options, great. We can understand those. We can argue about valuation. But if it's a public company, we at least get to look at that and draw conclusions.
Right.
But many companies, even public companies, of course, use performance shares and other kinds of phantom awards, some of which, based on their publicly disclosed description, you have no ability to figure out what they're worth or what they might be worth.
Right.
So, even in cases where, in theory, we have complete disclosure, the disclosure is done in such a way as to confuse and or obfuscate what's going on, and that's by the company. And then you also get the issue with public data, as we talked about with surveys, with the old Towers Parent approach, is we add the current salary to last year's bonus when there was a bonus, and said that was last year's pay, which was clearly just incorrect. Well, the same issue exists with the SEC reporting requirements in terms of share awards, because they're also get into the issue of look back, look forward on these things. And I think it was Goldman Sachs was the first public company that said, this is the amount of money that the compensation committee recommended and that the board approved that we paid our executive officers. And it was A plus B plus C, and they had a D, and here's your total. And it's not what we report in the tables, because the tables have a requirement that doesn't match what our decision-making process is.
Is that a cultural issue? Is that a philosophy issue?
It's a Wall Street investment banking specific issue that a lot of financial firms then followed. Morgan Stanley was second, and other firms followed it. But what I really liked about it is they were saying to their shareholders and to research analysts or anybody who wanted to look at it, we made a decision on paying John Corzine, on paying various different executives this amount of money. It had a base salary of this, a bonus of this, even though we didn't pay it until January, and all those kinds of things. And a stock award which we felt was worth X. You can value it any way you want, as people do play with valuation.
Sure.
But we said it's worth X. And in the Wall Street environment, they did not take a discount for restrictions. So if they said, or Morgan Stanley or any of those firms said, we gave someone a $5 million stock award and invest over 3 years, they didn't say we gave them $1.7 million each year for 3 years. They said we gave them $5 million, and that was our mindset.
Right.
Well, that's an interesting wrinkle in terms of comparability to other industries, as many people will do for executive jobs, and not stay within their own industry. But it's also an insight into what the company was thinking when they made the decision.
Right.
Whereas you don't actually get that information. You certainly don't get it on non-execs, because there's no description. The pay philosophy doesn't tell you very much about how they made individual pay decisions below exec level. So that is an interesting disclosure point. And it certainly leads into a topic of whether, all disclosure is good, all disclosure is informative, some disclosure is misleading. What do you do with it? But there's certainly been an effort over years to have more transparency, and feeling that transparency is the better answer. And it is the better answer, but it is not the only answer. And it doesn't give you the complete picture. So that's
I remember when I was
series
in
of
that.
topics.
I'm sorry. I remember when I was in that job at Morgan Stanley, and the proxy studies we had to do, we had to read between the lines of what was the intent of the grant for that period of time, because there was some obfuscation in some of the proxy statements as to what was meant when there was a grant in 1 year and you read that it had, vesting over the next 3, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. And so what we would do is actually put that value in each of those out years, not front load it, because it wasn't useful in that year. And obviously there are different schools of thought as to whether it's the grant is for that 1 year and their total direct comp includes all of it, but that also ignores all the past grants that have been given that have the vesting that's immediate or that are over a 4-year period or whatever, but they overlap. And so there's then that, there are different ways of looking at it. And so in terms of looking at it from a market data perspective, Mike, and when people are trying to set strategy for how they're paying relative to other companies, don't they have to, not only they have to inform their board, but don't they have to pick an option? Sorry, that's a bad use of words. Pick a method and then just stick with it?
Well, the answer is they should pick a method, And the answer is they should stick with it. But I will tell you, without naming any names, I've worked with some public company boards where the board really doesn't understand the mechanics. So the HR function is the gatekeeper on the mechanics, and they sometimes change what they're doing and don't necessarily represent that to the board. So the board says, oh, last year it was $100, this year it's $110, it's a 10% increase. And the answer is, well, we changed the valuation methodology for the stock awards, so it actually went down 32 or went up 52 or whatever it is, and you have no way of knowing. Now, arguably, that should not be allowed.
No.
And it should get stamped out. But I will tell you, I've certainly seen it happen in very large corporations. I will also tell you that when you get into some industries, and this would be true outside of high tech and outside of financial services, where the pay levels are considered exorbitant.
Yeah.
But if you're in a traditional manufacturing or retailing business, and the pay may not, for executives in particular, may not bounce around very much, and they're not attempting to have it bounce around very much. There doesn't tend to be either much distortion in the way the equity awards work, or there's not much focus on it, or
Right.
We get you get a lot of focus, and particularly if you work in certain industries, you get a lot of focus on the top end numbers. But there are many industries where even the CEO doesn't make very much money. So, and a lot of it's base salary. So, there's not a lot of distortion. There's not a lot of potential for problems. It's
Right.
really the industries with the highest degree of leverage in their incentive plans,
Right.
and the more complicated incentive plans.
But you also get a lot of beta or a lot of difference in the variability of the stock. And you also have a lot of variability in the performance. And therefore,
Sure.
in the more highly productive
Leveraged.
and the more high throughput, whatever you want to call it, but in those more, I call them more sleepy industries, there is that steadiness, and grants aren't as large, but they have more potential for growth because there is less variability. Now, I'm not saying that there's growth in their total direct comp because of that, because it's much smaller, but at least it's steadier, or at least there's not the promise of steady, but at least the kind of the blaseness. It probably will go up, but we don't know.
Yeah. It's interesting you use the word blasé. I mean, sometimes if you think about, the big money managers who have to, vote for or recommend voting for all these shares they have in these mutual funds, or where they're making the decision. So when you get these say on pay votes, and I think they probably do get a little, because they're dealing with hundreds, if not thousands, of these votes, and none of them have the resources to really evaluate it. So it's we're on a slightly different topic, but it's mostly outsourced to the proxy advisory firms, and they don't really have the resources to do it correctly either. So they come up with some standardized ways of doing it, and everybody just moves on as if that handles it. But you get blasé in the proxy advisory firm if it's $20 million, but it meets the model, and you get crazed if it's $3 million, but it's outside the model. So it's an interesting situation where the absolute amounts psychologically drive a lot of the drama, whereas in probably a lot of cases there's much more questionable behavior behind the scenes.
Sure.
With smaller amounts, because
Maybe, yeah.
people are so focused. If you can make $25 million 1 year as the CEO at JP Morgan, as he has, and the next year you can get 30, and the next year you can get 20, and you get a lot of stock, and Jamie owns a ton of stock in the company, and your net worth is, who knows how many hundreds of millions of dollars.
Right.
You're not going to, there's no way JP Morgan is messing around with the way they make those decisions. They
Sure.
don't have a need to.
Right.
But if you're in an organization where, boy, the CEO is, barely making $1 million, $1.25 million or something like that, and then if that PSU paid off or got valued a certain way, would have generated an extra $500,000, that's where you're much more likely to have,
Right.
shenanigans for choice of a old school word.
Right. But because that actually matters, then there may be some optics there, right?
Sure, but again, it's not if you're Fidelity or Vanguard or State Street, who are the three biggest, I think, in terms of managing funds.
Portfolios, yeah.
You got to put screens in terms of where you're going to focus your energy and attention,
Well,
and you are going to focus on the high profile ones. Some of which, Tesla. That stock grant was ridiculous.
Challenged in court.
Yeah, in the old days, some of the oil companies, Aramco, the CEO there was often one of the top 5 paid executives in the world. There was a client, I won't mention their name, where they said we have to give the CEO $100 million stock option grant, otherwise he'll leave. And it's like the guy's been with the firm forever. It's his legacy. You're not leaving for any reason. You want to give him a $100 million stock award because you think he's worth it, fine. But don't pretend it's because of another reason. So, again, not market data effectiveness, but you do get into issues with organizations trying to create a rationale for something they've done, which the point earlier that is legitimate that we were talking about relative to market data is now how do I, as a person in another company, a competitor, how do I evaluate that? Because I don't really understand what they're doing.
And that gets me to a question which I think a lot of people would ask, which is how do you take all of the data that exists and cut through the noise to find the insight? Because there are so many points of data. Like you mentioned, the $100 million grant, it's maybe an aberration. But if we looked at it in the context of the, I'll just use a statistic that gets screwed up with this, an average for the other CEOs in the oil industry, that $100 million is going to have an effect, probably. I mean, maybe not. We're talking $100 million here. So, but seriously, how do people cut through the noise to get to insight when it comes to market data with all of the crap going on right now?
Yeah. So now we'll get down into the weeds here a little bit, but and this ties into your comment before about having a standard approach or an agreed upon process for doing things. I think most reasonable analysts, and by that I don't, it could be a research analyst, it could be a compensation analyst, but people who have that analyst mindset, they will typically, scientists also, will typically say, use the median, not the mean.
Sure.
So that the outlier gets, not necessarily ignored, but doesn't distort the answer. So that $100 million person, when everybody else makes $1 million, doesn't raise the, you say the average is $50 million for, 2 people data point sample as opposed to, Now, mind you, the median's the same answer in a 2-person data
in that
sample.
case, yes.
For anybody who was paying attention. But, if you're in industries with high degree of volatility and high pay levels, you can't ignore the $100 million outlier, theoretical outlier, because your CEO doesn't ignore it or your head of whatever that business unit doesn't ignore it.
And they probably know about it too.
Absolutely know about it. Obviously, particularly if it's public data, but even sometimes when it's not. So if you're managing a process, you're the head of compensation and benefits, or you're the head of HR, or you're a board chair, or the compensation committee chair, you need advice and counsel. You need information. You need someone to put something into context for you and say, well, that award was a one-time only, or that award was meant to be a 5-year grant, and they won't do another grant for 5 years. There are some industries and some countries where that is more common than it is in the U.S.
Sure.
So you do need all that color commentary. You don't necessarily need it if you think back to where we started in the last conversation. If you're doing salary surveys, you're not looking at the same thing. Well, we didn't give a merit increase this year because we only give a merit increase every 3 years. Nobody does that. They may not be able to afford an increase, and they may zero out their budget, but it's not because their concept is merit increases are every 3, 4, 5 years.
But that's also not going to show up as a blip on anybody's radar because it's just 3 or 2 or 4%. So it's not going to cause that unless it's the market leader by sheer volume.
Right. Absolutely. Although, again, there are industries that, when I started out at McLagan Partners and we were doing surveys, and we did a lot of stuff that was really brokerage firm driven, less commercial bank driven in the early years. Merrill Lynch was as big as most of the rest of the industry combined. Like if you looked at
Sure.
operations jobs or something like
Yeah.
that, or technology jobs, Merrill had almost as many people as everybody else. So
Right.
if you weren't careful with the way you would analyze data, you would basically be comparing everyone in the market to Merrill Lynch.
Right.
And in the old days, Citigroup probably on the banking side, et cetera, where they just had so many more people doing some job categories that can be a danger. Most industries don't have that, but it's a legitimate point.
Yep.
I think the other thing that we, when I was thinking about this and I wrote some notes for myself, if you have an understanding of what the market practice is, well, when you go back, you have to know who you want to compete with, right? So some of the market data problems that any organization has is they have the wrong sample. They have the wrong peer group. They've been convinced that the peer group is the best 3 firms in the industry, best 5 firms in the industry. And, they're the 25th in the league table of any, 25th largest oil company, 25th largest retailer, et cetera. But it's like, no, we have to compare ourselves to ExxonMobil or whomever.
Right.
So there's always upward bias there. Warren Buffett has famously had a lot of quite negative things to say about, pay consultants because, they've ignored those biases and ginned things up. Now, mind you, when he became the controlling shareholder of Salomon Brothers, he had some really stupid compensation ideas himself. Which didn't last a year.
No,
so,
not very long.
So, the idea that you should ignore the experts because you're so smart in other fields is always a dangerous thing, but that's a different topic. I think you have to know what you're trying to get at, what information is available, what information is not available, how the that phrase that came up, I think it was Donald Rumsfeld, the known unknowns.
Right.
So what we don't know about market data in our peer group, what we don't know about the provider of the market data in terms of their methodology, what we don't know in terms of the inside analysis approach that our team has used, but by the time you get to senior management, they don't know whether you're using the median or the mean.
Right.
And shocking as it may seem to some people, but you probably experienced this, you're dealing with all these Harvard MBAs, and they go, what's the difference between the median and the mean again? And you're like, oh, God, didn't you take a statistics course?
Yes.
Well,
what was even more fascinating is when you had to explain to them that there was a difference between employee stock options and stock options that you traded. That was even more fun. And you were dealing with investment bankers. And that was... why can't I give this to my kids?
Yeah, they can run a Black Scholes model on it for you, though, if you just give them some data.
Yes.
So I think those are important considerations to having effective market pricing or market data. It's having a management team that is willing to do things in a consistent fashion, that doesn't change for the flavor of the month because it suits them or they just have a whim. One of the nice things about, we both share Morgan Stanley heritage.
Yep.
They changed their approach to things ever so slowly. There was no conscious internal conversation that I'm aware of which said, oh, don't change things because change is bad or anything like that. It's just that consistency in approach, coming to something that works and staying with it means that comparability exists. And we may have made a mistake, for instance, but if we've, not that they were trying to do this, but if we continue to make the same mistake, at least we're comparable.
Consistent. Yeah, exactly.
Nobody's recommending that, of course. But
no. Ignorance is not bliss.
The ability to say we prepare our data. I'll tell you one example. When you do consulting work and you work across a lot of different firms, one of the fascinating things that you see is how organizations change their internal presentations. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they've changed their data analytics approach, but the way they package it up for senior management or the board varies. And sometimes it varies every year. So, I've been the board consultant for firms for, 5 to 10 years in a row at times. And you're like, why are we showing it this way now? Oh, and fill in whatever blank. And
Right.
sometimes it's a good reason, sometimes it's not such a great reason. So consistency in approach when you can have it
Yeah.
is really useful. It's useful for the management team. It's useful in particular for the board because they don't look at this stuff. Even the compensation committee does not look at these kinds of things on a really regular basis. You may say, well, that's their job.
No. Right.
But, any given Tuesday, they're doing something else.
But Mike, one of the things I found is, especially when we're talking about board presentations and executive presentations, is they'll look at last year's and they'll go, this is a little different. Why? What's different about it? Because I'm looking at, like, they'll actually bring last year's with them and have this year's and be comparing it and going, okay, this number is different than what it showed last year. Why? What did you revise it?
Yeah.
And so if you don't put footnotes, you're screwed.
That's either bad internal work, or it's bad consultants, or it's a combination thereof. You can't. I mean, a CEO gets away with saying lots of things because they're in charge, and a department head within their department, same thing, etc. But when you're doing staff work, you have to be as precise as possible, as consistent as possible. And you have to be transparent. You have to say, right, there's a change in the peer group.
Right, exactly.
Or the firm has agreed to utilize a different benchmark target. Like we had a client that for a number of years said, our goal wasn't median. Our goal was which was a unique McLagan statistic, third high median, which is a crazy target. But that's what they decided they wanted to be. And
yes.
Here was their rationale, to be fair. They decided third high median meant that was the middle of the pack for the top five.
Okay. That makes sense.
We want to be a top five player, and we don't want to be overly aggressive, but we don't want to undersell either what our requirements are. So third high median. Okay, right. Did they understand what that really meant? No. And you try and explain it, but whatever. So they got a new CEO, and he said, "Where the hell did this target come from?" He had never heard of any such thing in another organization, and it went away, as it undoubtedly should have.
Yes.
So you have reasons why you do want to change and why you want to do things differently, but from the staff work perspective, and I include any consultant in that, we're part of the staff in that sense.
Of course.
You have to do all those things in terms of transparency and footnoting and really. Footnoting is usually not good enough because I think people feel like you tried to hide something in a footnote. You almost need a page on the front end of any presentation that says there are three notable things.
Sure, absolutely.
So that you're really upfront.
You're confronting it up front. You're being upfront about it.
And people don't read. So, if you say, well, there's 12 pages of footnotes, you're probably going to get fired.
Right, but they'll go and look at a number. It's that number.
Sure.
They're looking at that number. Sure. And they're going to focus on that number forever.
Absolutely.
And God forbid that number is wrong, Mike.
Yeah. Well, it's a number.
We've both been in presentations when we've been confronted about one number. In a 20-page deck, we're confronted about one number, and we have to defend just one freaking number.
Yeah. Well, I think the answer is why you prepare, right? So the higher the stakes, and that's high stakes when you have an audience that does that, right?
Yeah.
So the behavior of your audience matters. And again, we haven't talked about that, but it might seem like a silly thing, but it's not just your audience. You say, oh, it's a board, it's senior management, it's a department head, it's just a colleague. Those are all different audiences.
Right.
But how they behave and how they react. And there are some organizations where it's standard practice to scream at people, and there are others where they would never do that. Right. So you have to understand, and there's places where you get 10 seconds to make the impression, and others where they're like, "Oh, we work with you for years, and we coach and we learn and whatever." And if you're one type of person, you're in the other organization, it isn't going to work well.
No.
So
we've both been in those situations where we've shown up to meetings and it hasn't gone very well. We're like, the exit's over there.
Yeah. Now this is the bragging part of it. I didn't have too many of those meetings.
Thank God.
I can count those on probably two hands, maybe three, but which I feel quite fortunate in. But the hard part for me towards the end of my career is the reason some of those meetings would go sideways was the client. And you have to sit there and go, right, how much can I point out they're an idiot? And the answer is usually not very much.
No, not at all, especially because that check that they're going to have to sign has the word "not an idiot" on it.
Yeah. I actually never had, I got stiffed on one bill my whole career, which was amazing.
Wow.
For $1,500. So next to nothing.
That's not bad.
Yeah.
That's what we call a rounding error.
Absolutely.
For some people, Mike.
I think as institutions got bigger and bigger, you could have a bad meeting. You're still getting paid. They still paid you. So I don't think that was,
especially if there was yelling.
No one took your salary away from you, David, did they?
Not to this point, but that I'm going to knock on wood. Mike,
we've
come to the end again of another jam-packed half hour of absolute market pricing, market data geekdom. But I'm going to ask you back again if you don't mind. Because I can talk to you all day.
Well, I think you have to find out if anybody else wants me back. But if you're inviting me, I'll show up.
Oh, okay, good. I'm the only one who cares about this. Just kidding, audience.
Terrific. Thanks, David. Bye now.